It's important that whenever we read a historical fiction novel, we understand a little bit about the history that the historical fiction novel is talking about. So as we start reading Esperanza Rising, which is historical fiction, like we talked about yesterday and today, we're going to know a little bit more about how the Mexican Revolution impacted some of the events that happened and that will happen in Esperanza Rising. So for your assignment today, you just have to read this article, and then you're going to be writing two or more, if you're feeling up to it, things that you learned that you didn't know before, and maybe some questions you have after learning about this. So I'm going to start reading now. The title is Esperanza Rising and the Mexican Revolution, 1910 to 1920. So this means that the Mexican Revolution lasted about 10 years, from 1910 to 1920. Mexico had two major revolutions. The first one lasted from 1810 to 1820. The second one lasted from 1910 to 1920. Prior to 1517, the inhabitants of Mexico did what pretty much every early civilization did. They worked to live and support themselves and spent a lot of time fighting amongst themselves. In 1517, the Spaniards arrived. The Spaniards were able to conquer the natives fairly easy because they convinced tribes to become their allies and fight against other tribes. Then the Spanish conquered the weakened tribes. The Spaniards ruled for the next 300 years. Those of Spanish descent ruled. Those of mixed blood, Spanish and native, were next in the power hierarchy. The native population was lowest in rank and power. This meant that land that had originally belonged to the natives in Mexico now belonged to the Spanish. It also meant that the natives ended up having to work for the rich Spanish landowners. The Spaniards were not effective rulers. They devastated the native population and the land. The mixed blood residents, those who had both Spanish and native blood in them, called the mestizos, rose up and broke from Spanish in a revolution that lasted from 1810 to 1820. For the next 100 years, things didn't get a whole lot better. The very rich held all the power, and everyone else was very poor. There was a lot of fighting to see who would be in charge. No one was happy. In 1910, things came to a head, and the non-landowners, known as rebels, rose up and demanded more equal sharing of resources and power. It was a bloody and complex conflict in which more than 900,000 people lost their lives. The revolution began with a call to arms to overthrow the dictator, Porfirio Diaz Mori, who had been in power for 34 years. Diaz was an ambitious president who wanted to modernize Mexico at the expense and suffering of its farm workers, laborers, and peasants. He ruled by bullying and intimidation. He crushed many civil liberties. For example, there was no freedom of the press while he ruled. But the greatest injustices came in the form of new laws about land ownership. In an attempt to strengthen his ties with the United States and other influential world leaders, Diaz gave lands that had belonged to the people of Mexico to foreigners. In addition, he made a rule that no Mexican was able to own land unless they had a formal legal title. Small farmers were rendered utterly helpless, so they revolted. The revolution ended in 1920 when Diaz fled to Mexico. There were a series of rulers after he left. Power changed hands rapidly, mostly as a result of violence or assassination. At the end, General Obregón was elected president. This is roughly where we come in at the beginning of Esperanza Rising. The revolution is over, but there's still a lot of bandits running around, and there are many bad feelings towards landowners. Before I close off, I want to point out some words that we should know. So landowners, someone who owns land or a property. Revolution often refers to a type of war where someone is standing up for something. and two sides are fighting for a common interest. Then I also want us to know that the Spaniards, when they're referring to the Spaniards, they're referring to people who came from Spain. And Spain is a country in Europe. And during this time, in many other parts of the world, similar things were happening. The other thing to notice are the text features here. The numbers on the left side tell us what paragraph number we're on. And then I see images to show us different things, and the words under the images are called captions. And in this case, the caption is telling us that this is a picture, a portrayal of Porfirio Diaz Mori, who we learned about in that section. On the next page, we have another image, and the caption tells us that this is an actual real photo of Mexican rebel soldiers.